Okay, thank you. Okay. Do you know, when Anthony came to talk to my students, the same thing happened. And it went on for 10 minutes. But nevertheless, the way he was adaptive and the way he coped with that situation is a great lesson to us all. In the sense that a theme that I want to talk about here is adaptability in organisations. Before I do that, I just want to give a personal story of why that theme is important to me. I'm talking about organisations because I work in a business school. However, that was my second passion. My first passion is related to the first speaker. My first degree was in art and archaeology in a history department. However, I don't know if people know England, whether people know Iron Age hill forts. There's a divide between Scotland.
Hello.
Never worked with Anthony. Whenever we were giving our lectures to the MBA students, he was always saying, can I just chip in with a comment here? And nevertheless, it was really valuable when he did it. Now, the story I was telling is the reason why organisations and management is a second passion is the first passion was art and architecture. The borders between Scotland and England, there's a set of hills, not as high as these hills. And I was on an archaeological dig for 3 weeks. However, I was assigned to a particular patch. I had a kind of a 1 metre square. In those days, it was a 1 yard square. And they said, just carry on digging and just keep digging until the soil changes colour. However, what they didn't realise is I'm colourblind, especially in greens and browns. So I was digging, and I was digging all morning. I was digging through the coffee break. And they came up to me after and said, you just destroyed 1,000 years of history. Anyway, after that I decided I'd go and find another passion. And my second passion was business and management. Now, the reason why I went in that direction is I think that a lot of us spend time in organisations, and organisations and those that lead them have a responsibility to look after us while we're working for them. And I'm not quite sure how many of those organisations really deliver, following on from the previous talk, deliver on the ethical position within that. So what I'm going to argue here is the need for what I call a possibility space. The idea for people in organisations to breathe and think and create. It's only through those moments, and it could be a series of moments, that inventions, new products, new services, new ways of leading organisations might emerge. And what I'm going to argue is for a position of a new learning model. And I'm going to call that co-reflexivity. Now, what co-reflexivity means for me is it's more than one person. Reflexivity, it's individuals reflecting on themselves and their experiences. What did they learn from those moments in time? And then them listening and joining together and say, how can we then go on a journey? So what does that mean practically? That practically means there's a problem to solve in the organisation. It could be a human problem or it could be a process problem, but it's only by two people having a dialogue that then enables them to come up with a very creative answer. Now, I'm in a business school, so there is research to support this position, and it does come from team research. And there's some studies being done where I work. I work in a business school, Aston Business School in the UK. And what they did is they worked with the NHS. They worked with various teams in the NHS, and they wanted to find out what is a high-performing team. And you would assume that if you're in a kind of intensive care unit, people would cooperate. There would be a team-type structure in operation there. What they really found is that wasn't necessarily the case. There's a hierarchy. There's a social structure. There's a command structure. Now, that works in certain situations. I was talking to somebody at lunch. In a military situation, you might rely on that command structure. And that command structure still exists within a team setting in a hospital. However, they found where there was increased cooperation, people openly dialoguing and talking with each other, they found that mortality rates reduce, i.e. people survive their operations longer. So this co-reflexivity seems to be empirically grounded in team-like structures. Now, what's the basis of creating those structures? I think it's curiosity. Now, I say that because curiosity is fundamental to us as human beings. If you think about us in terms of our evolution, why are we different to other types of animals? You can look at it in terms of DNA. You can look at it from that kind of genetic perspective. But it's what that adaptability, those changes in gene strings, actually what that leads to. And I'll give you an example of this innate curiosity that have led us to evolve. I'm going to talk about my nephew. Now, my nephew is about, well, he was about that high, and he was exploring the world through curiosity. Now, his world just happened to be a table. What he didn't understand about that table is that there were beams running across that table. However, he was low enough to be under the table, but he was high enough to go above the beam. So his way of learning about his environment and adapting to his environment was to run under the table and realise that his head was okay in certain positions, but his head wasn't okay in others. And he was just thumping, 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 thumping. But his curiosity to explore his world meant he learned not to do that again. Actually, that's not quite true. He did do it about 2 or 3 times, but in the end, that's what happened. He learned, he became adaptive. And this is what I think organisations need to do. Now, let me give you an example of a real-life example of co-reflexivity. I was working with a manager, I won't name him, but he was working for a police force, and he felt as though he was a prisoner to the social structure that police force had created. He thought he was a command-control type manager. Now, we know again from research, this type of leadership behaviour is not necessarily as effective as other types of behaviours in certain situations. But he'd learned that behaviour because his social structure had taught him to operate in that way, and it was effective. He got things done. However, he retired. He then came back into the police force. He was no longer an officer. He became a manager. In the UK, this is a big issue of privatisation of public services. You now have professionals and you have managers. Now, he came back in, and through co-reflexivity, his chosen path to co-reflexivity was to collaborate with other organisations. It was called inter-organisational working. He realised that he organised and worked in one way, but he needed to work in a different way. So he went outside of the organisation. What he realised was, through his reflexivity and talking to other people, is that he is actually a transformational leader, a transformational manager. What that means is he has an inspiring vision. He can talk to his colleagues. He can get them on board, collaborate, and use their ideas to drive the organisation to solve its problems. Now, this to him was a revelation. This was a revelation, but it was not a revelation to his team. They supported him. They produced great results because they knew he was a transformation leader. He did not know. Now, about my point about organisations being adaptive and an ethical responsibility to look after people, should they not have let him know that he was a good leader, that he was a transformation leader? And should that organisation also then realise that good practice exists and then transfer that good practice across the other teams? Now, with working with him, that's what he's gradually doing. He now works on their core leadership development programme. He's inspiring a generation of people afterwards. And I think that is co-reflexivity at its best. Now, I teach students, and students also need to feel as though their teachers are inspiring them in appropriate ways. Now, one of the themes here is about brain. I'm not a neuroscientist. I've done work with neuroscientists. I know about face perception. I know the role of beauty in face perception. I do know that people get promoted quicker because they are seen as beautiful people, literally, physically beautiful people. I also know there are all kinds of face perception biases. If you're perceived as sociable, you're more likely, again, to get promoted and sort tasks out. But I'm not that kind of person. So I'm going to talk about the cognitive level. That's just kind of patterns in the way people go about making their decisions. And what we found is that if you are an innovative teacher, if you're a person who can tell a story, a beginning, a middle and end, link a lecture to the whole programme, if you can then do more than that and be inspirational, actually talk to people as equals, in a setting like a business school, if you can work with real-life work-based examples, we can actually measure the cognitive level that students acquire what we call a deep approach to study. They become problem solvers, they become critical thinkers, they become assessors of what is a secure, sound judgment and what isn't. Now, in a higher education setting, this is absolutely fundamental. We know businesses are crying out for people who are adaptable, critical, reflexive. They are problem solvers. And we need to inspire our colleagues and our fellow teachers to actually transfer that learning to the students so they have the best chances, the best life chances to achieve their goals. Now, I just want to finish up. I was going to use a PowerPoint presentation. In fact, because there isn't PowerPoint, it's very naked for me not to use a PowerPoint. But I had a picture, and this picture was actually of my wife. And we were sightseeing, and we were looking out a window, and there was a camera looking at us. So what I was seeing was the back of her head looking out, but equally I could see the camera picture of her looking back in. And I think this is my closing message. We have a choice, and the choice is this. Do we want to remain as sole, single agents looking out to the world? Or might it just be better that we actually are co-reflexive and we join together and join our ideas together and we combine those ideas so we're not only looking out, we're looking back into ourselves, and therefore we're solving problems and being more effective in the workplace, but just to also, could we be ethical in that process? Identifying great people, great leaders, and transferring that practice to other people. Thank you very much.